The High Court of Justice here in Israel has ruled that there is no longer any legal framework for the government to grant ultra-Orthodox Yeshiva students exemptions from serving in the Israeli military. The court has also ruled that the government cannot continue to instruct the IDF and Defense Ministry not to draft ultra-Orthodox men into IDF service. Well, today there are around 67,000 ultra-Orthodox males who are eligible for Army service. And this ruling is absolutely critical in Israel because it could lead to the breakup of the government and major societal divides as well. The ultra-Orthodox political parties in the Israeli government furiously oppose the draft for their constituents, and they're demanding legislation to reinstate blanket draft exemptions. But some Likud Knesset members have already said that they cannot vote for those exemptions. And joining us now in the studio is our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. So, Owen, this is obviously a major development. What does this ruling mean for the future of Israel and its government?
Right. Well, first of all, what it doesn't mean, Natasha, it doesn't mean that tomorrow we're going to see 67,000 ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students dragged by the police off of their benches inside the seminaries and off to the bases. That's not what's going to happen. What this essentially does, as you said, is it puts the ball back in the government's court. And it's up for the coalition to pass the law that it's put on the table for 3,000 or 3,500 of those 60-some thousand to go and get drafted and fill the needs of the military. If that law passes, if it can get the votes in the Knesset, then the problem would seem to be solved, at least for the meantime. If the law doesn't get the vote, and as you mentioned, Natasha, there are some members of the coalition who are not all that enthusiastic necessarily about voting for this, or so they at least said before the High Court decision, then the government could fall. This, in a sense, could get punted. In a sense, it could be to the benefit of the ultra-Orthodox sector and the Haredi sector, because on the other side of the election, they could get a better deal. But in the meantime, and this is not unimportant, in the meantime, there are no budgets going to those yeshivas, because if the court is essentially saying these students shouldn't be in the yeshiva, they should be in the army. So, and consequently, you can't give the yeshivas money. It's a big potential problem.
Right. You know, so you kind of answered my question as to what happens next here, right? So there is a legal process that we're going to see take place. It's not happening tomorrow. But you know, I would kind of like to talk about where Israel, the public, stands on this and where the government stands on this, because obviously with the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, we've seen so many hundreds of thousands of reservists called up into duty. There has even been talks of extending the amount of years that soldiers serve in the reserves or even within the army itself because of the need for a larger army, given all the threats that Israel is facing. And so for a right-wing government, which is very much calling for this war to continue until Hamas is fully dismantled, to then say, well, here's an entire population of the sector that doesn't have to serve. I mean, how is that going to be accepted by the public?
We'll use an American political term, Natasha. This is a wedge issue for the Israeli right. And this is the ultimate wedge issue for the Israeli right. And this war is driving that wedge deeper and deeper and deeper into the ground. Because you're absolutely right. On one hand, the Haredi sector, the ultra-Orthodox sector, is part and parcel of the right-wing camp and the right-wing part of the society here in Israel. On the other hand, other parts of that right-wing society are there serving in the army, are there sending off their fathers and their husbands to go do reserve duty at this point, month after month after month after month. They're there. And so there is resentment among that public, just as well as with the center and left-wing soldiers and reservists serving alongside them. So this is a wedge issue, and that is brought to bear inside the Knesset and in the voting halls by those Likud members of Knesset, of parliament, who are saying, hold on, we're not voting for this. We aren't there. Our constituents aren't there. We're not willing to continue to exempt an entire sector from military service while we are essentially being, in Israeli terms, friars and holding this on our shoulders now more than ever because of the war. That's why it's such a difficult and trenchant issue for the Israeli right. That's why this issue has potential for the center-left camp in an election campaign to be able to come back to power. That said, we've seen an election campaign after election campaign after election campaign. The public agenda in Israel is so crowded, let alone in the middle of a security situation and war such as this one, that it is not at all certain that this issue could get to the top of that agenda. But within the Israeli right, it's a wedge issue and it's a problem. And that's why that potential is already hovering over the surface of Israeli politics.
Right, and that's why we're hearing many, people say that this could be what is going to lead to the breakup of the current governing coalition, not the mass anti-government protests that we're seeing on the streets, but rather this very issue. If this law does go into effect, what are the long-term implications?
Well, look, the medium-term implications is, assuming it would pass any further legal review, that this would at least kick the can down the road and give the coalition a sense of safety and peace at home, if you will, for the time being. This issue, of course, isn't going anywhere. It's been a long-term issue for Israeli society, a long-term horizon, how to integrate this growing sector of the Israeli public, where the numbers, Natasha, are something like 4% of the Israeli public over the age of 60 or 65 is ultra-Orthodox, and some 25% of the Israeli public under the age of 4. So you see the impact of the birth rates and of the numbers.
Right.
The group is getting larger, and it's interesting because usually in democracies, when a group gets larger as a part of the public, it becomes easier for it to get its political demands. Here you have a kind of ironic situation. The more Haredim there are, the more ultra-Orthodox there are, it's harder for them to get their political demands because of this issue of the army and the issue of the economy. What the war has done is it's moved up the deadline for this issue. If, in theory, the long-term deadline where this needed to be solved for the Israeli society and economy and army to function were, I'm throwing out a number, this is inexact, 50 years out. Maybe now that deadline is being moved up to the army significantly, 20 years out, 10 years out. The army is saying it needs, of course, the soldiers right now, which was the basis for the court's decision.
Right.
So the timeline is moved up by the war, of course, with the birth rates as well. And that is what's driving the court decision, literally they say so, and going to be driving the politics and the social debate.